Hello all. So this is the lecture for the class that I'll be missing. This is lesson 12, target costing. Actually, it's lesson 11, target costing. I went through the material on this and I felt that the reading, cost planning for the product lifecycle, target costing, theory of constraints and strategic pricing. So the section you actually have to read for lesson 12 is the target costing. Did a good job of discussing this, and the examples within that material were reasonable and gave a good description of it. I also felt that the video that Dr. Buttrose made was good and gave a good example of the information. Um, I think the big thing about the target costing is the issue that we're talking about a price-led system as opposed to a price maker system. So generally, when we think about um, the price being set, we think about the company manufacturing the product, calculating the cost of the product, and then setting the price as cost plus a markup. So we often do cost plus profit margin. So it's cost plus 10%. So you would take the cost times 1.1, and that gives you the selling price. Um, the target costing system came out of Japan, and it's found in markets that are very heavily competitive. And the idea is that the price is what leads the manufacturing process, so that the cost or the price that the customer is willing to pay is what leads the design process and determines how much the product can cost. So the whole process starts with the company going out and determining what it is the customers want, what they're willing to pay for the product that they want, and then going through the design process to design a product that the customer meets the customer's demands at a price that the customer is willing to pay. And then while they're designing that product, figuring out how it can be manufactured um, at a cost that gives them the profit that they require. So if they determine that they require a certain profit, so if they determine they need a 10% profit margin and the customer has stated that they will um, only pay $100, they have to back in and figure out what is the cost that the product can have in order for them to end up with that 10% product. So this is a strategic process. It's a strategic profit and cost management process, and it's referred to as cost-led. It's very customer focused. It's design centered. It requires cross-functional um, design and cross-functional um, cross-functional assessment of the product. It's very life cycle oriented because they're looking at cost savings throughout the entire life cycle of the process, and they're looking at the value chain. So it's value chain based. So they're looking at how savings can happen throughout the value chain. So the big thing that we would be doing in class is looking at this target costing example for a service firm. So I did post this in the canvas for you to print and look at. It does have 3 requirements under it. So the first one is what are the current profit margins on both trips in dollars and percentages. The second one, they changed the sales price for the Cancun trip and the Jamaica trip. And then they want you to recalculate the profit margins for both packages at those price levels. And then the third one, they want you to talk about 2 ways that they could cut their costs to get the profit margins back to their original levels. So this is an example of target costing in a service firm. So the first thing we need to do to work in this setting is to determine what the cost is for these trips. So I've gone and put this into a spreadsheet. So for each of the different costs, the cost data, I have a line, and I've listed here the unit costs that they provided us. And those were the same in Cancun and Jamaica for everything except for the airfare and the transportation to the airport. The Cancun trip offered 6 nights. Jamaica trip offered 4 nights. Cancun, there were 7 breakfasts. Jamaica, there were 5. Cancun, there were 7 lunches. Jamaica, there were 5. Cancun, there were 6 dinners. Jamaica, there were 0. Cancun, there were 4 scuba diving trips. Jamaica, there were 2. Cancun, there were 5 water skiing trips. Cancun, there were 2. And then we had these airfare and the transportation of $215 in Cancun and $355 and $10 in Jamaica. So I extended these items with the quantity for Cancun, extended the items with the prices for Jamaica, and came up with a total cost for a Cancun trip of $649 and a total cost for Jamaica of $595. So it further tells us in the information that the Cancun trip is selling for $750 and the Jamaica trip is selling for $690. So part A says, what are the current profit margins on both trips? And they want that in dollars and percentage. So to get our profit margin, we're taking the sales price minus the cost to get our profit margin. So sales minus our cost gives us a profit margin for Cancun of $101 and for Jamaica for $95. Now, if we want to express that as a profit margin percentage, we're going to divide the profit margin by the sales dollars. And for Cancun, that's going to give us a 13.47% profit margin, and for Jamaica, it's going to give us a 13.77 profit margin. So these are pretty close here. For part 2, what they ask us to do is to assume that our sales price drops to $710 for Cancun and $650 for Jamaica. So I'm going to go to the next screen. Okay, so in part 2, we've revised the sales price to $710 for Cancun and $650 for Jamaica. So with the cost remaining the same, our profit margin goes down to 61 for Cancun, which is 8.59%. Originally, that was 13.47%. And for Jamaica, it went down to $55, which is 8.46%, and that was originally 13.77%. So if we're doing target costing, we want our profit percentage to remain at these original roughly 0.5 and 13.77%. So we would want our profit to remain at $96 for Cancun and $90 for Jamaica. So our cost for Cancun should be about $614, and for Jamaica should be about $560. So the cost for Cancun needs to drop by about $35, and the cost for Jamaica needs to drop by about $35. So part 3 wants to know 2 ways that you could cut the cost to get your profit margin back up to this 13.77%. 13.5 or 13.8% profit margins. So what you're doing is going back through here and looking for $35. So for Cancun, I mean, ideally, the first thing you want to do is go and talk to the customers. So these are spring break students. So I would think probably they're going to sleep till noon because they will have been up all night long. So maybe they don't care about breakfast because they won't be up until after breakfast is over. So they don't care about the $35 for breakfast because they're not going to be up for it anyways. So I would say that would be a good thing to drop because they just don't care. They won't be up in time for it. So that might be a good way to drop the costs there. If they say that they want breakfast, another place you might be able to go is to drop maybe some of the water skiing trips or some of the scuba diving trips. Although, you know, students who are out on spring break, they probably want to do the activities. So that might not be something that's of as much interest. You may be able to get the transportation thrown in with the hotel cost, because a lot of times hotels have their own shuttles that go from the airport to the hotel, so possibly you can get that thrown in. Perhaps you can get a continental breakfast thrown in with the hotel cost, so maybe that's, you can do some combination with that. Perhaps you can drop some combination of dinners and transportation and breakfast. But I would think the first thing you would want to do is kind of feel out the customers and see what they would miss the most. For the Jamaica, same sort of thing. It's, you know, possibly again, you can get the transportation wrapped up with the hotel. I may not be as easy to do. I know Jamaica is more of a closed kind of community thing, but again, the breakfast may not be as much of a big deal because these are spring break students. I don't know that they're going to be up in the morning to eat breakfast. So perhaps these two would cover your $35. Perhaps they're not going to be as interested in the scuba diving. Jamaica isn't sort of the scuba diving capital that Cancun is. So that's a possibility. Lunches, since they don't have a lot of food on the Jamaica trip, that probably isn't the way you want to go. Especially since, you know, Jamaica is kind of the closed, well, most of Jamaica, you're in these enclosed venues where food is usually included. That would be kind of weird. But again, you need to go talk to the people who are going to be buying these and see what's most important to them. So I would think the activities are important to the college students on spring break. You might be able to work something out on the airfares with the airlines, but you may not because it's a high travel season. Same thing with the hotels. You might be able to buy a block of suites, but again, that might be difficult to do because that's a high demand season and you may not have as much flexibility at getting access to those. So that's kind of where you have limitations.